Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, of course, is former head of policy at the U.S. Treasury, one of the top economists out there. Forbes magazine and others have reported over the years, and he's accurately predicted what's happening in the world economy. So I want to get his take on that, and then his syndicated columns that are breaking down the funding of al-Qaeda to attack Libya and Syria, now Iran, and where he thinks that's going. And we will also give you his website. It's paulcraigroberts.org. And he joins us now. Doc, this is a short segment, as you know, but long segment coming up. Wow, things are deteriorating fast. It looks like Spain and other places are going the way of Argentina.
Well, they might. On the other hand, Alex, that hype is very useful to the banks because they can make a lot of money with the interest rate swaps, with shorting Spanish debt, with credit default swaps against the debt. So it's unless you spend half the day on that problem, it's hard to know how much of that is really real and serious and how much is it hype for money-making opportunities by Wall Street.
Sure. All I know is they're engineering a financial collapse while posing as the saviors and doing bailouts that are really wealth transfers to themselves. And they talk about this new Agenda 21 post-industrial model, and you point out that, we can't have a recovery because they've deindustrialized us. I mean, there's a method to the madness.
Well, yes, there's a variety of methods, and it's certainly the case that after, what has it been now, 4 years or more of very easy money, in fact, the easiest monetary policy in our history, the largest budget deficits, there's still no recovery, and there can't be one because, as our friend John Williams has pointed out, the consumer incomes, real consumer incomes, deflated by the CPI, are today where they were in 1967. So in terms of real purchasing power, the Americans have no more money than they had in 1967. And in fact, it's even worse than that, Alex, because John, to avoid too much controversy, uses the CPI. But he has shown that the CPI itself dramatically understates the inflation. And if you were to deflate American incomes today by a more realistic measure, they would have less money today than they had in 1967. So how do you get a recovery? There's no consumer income. And we've talked about this before. And the Federal Reserve relied for years on the expansion of consumer debt and rising housing prices and refinancing the houses and spending the equity to keep the economy going. But that's over with, too. So there's no way that there can be a recovery. And in Europe, it's an equally bad situation because what is really happening is that the EU is using what they call the sovereign debt crisis in order to destroy the sovereignty of the individual member states. The EU intends to turn Germany and France and Spain.
Doc, stay there. We got to go to break. Let's come back and start at square one here. Your breakdown of the real state of the world economy, where you think it's going, what QE infinity means, your take on what's happening in Europe, and then how that ties into the larger funding of al-Qaeda to go haywire all over the world. For more than 6 years, I've talked on the air about creating a social network. PlanetInfowars.com is in its beta phase. We're just launching it, and I want to invite all of you out there to be in on the ground level. Planet Infowars is about people coming together, forming activist organizations, getting involved politically, hunting and fishing, gardening, dating. This is a place for people who love freedom to meet and to talk and to write and to post information. And I give you this pledge. We are not going to spy on you and sell your data to the New World Order. PlanetInfowars.com is free, so people who love freedom can get together. Connect with people who are awake and know what we're facing. Be active, organize, take action, go viral, create, contribute, resist, because resistance is victory. You are victory. It's waiting for you to breathe power into it. PlanetInfowars.com. Briefly, everybody's chomping at the bit. Last time in 36 hours, we sold out of more than 30,000 copies of the first Infowars magazine. We're selling it again at cost at InfoWarsStore.com, and they are going quick right now. The new technocracy issue, it's got a great article in there by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts exposing that both the Democrats and the Republicans see the American people as disposable. We'll get into that with him. You can order that at InfoWarsStore.com or call 888-253-3139 or sign up at Infowars.com/newsletter. And Friday, we'll send you a free digital copy right to your inbox this Friday, Infowars.com/newsletter. Okay, let's go back to Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, whose website is paulcraigroberts.org, former head of policy at the U.S. Treasury, the father of Reaganomics. And he also, of course, was one of the main editors of the Wall Street Journal and Business Week. And he joins us now, senior fellow at the Hoover Institute, top economist, to break down QE Unlimited, what it means, what we're seeing in Europe, and where this invariably leads. Dr. Roberts.
Okay. First, Europe. The crisis is being used by the banks to impose the cost on private individuals and to establish the principle that they are not responsible for their own losses, but that the losses of private banks can be farmed out to the general population. Same thing that happened here. Also in Europe, the European Central Bank and the European Union are using the crisis to centralize power over the member countries. And so the crisis itself, to the extent that it's real, is being hyped to serve those two purposes as well. And so since they are focused not on solving the crisis, but using it to achieve other agendas, then the economic problems are not being addressed. And we covered prior to the break the situation here. There's no basis for a recovery. All the good jobs have been sent offshore, and the only jobs that the United States seems able to create are low-paid domestic service jobs, waiters, bartenders, hospital orderlies. Now, the situation on the war front, what we saw with the Libyan assassination of the American ambassador, the capture of the CIA records in the safe house, I think what we're now seeing finally is a response of the Muslims to the domination of their life, culture, and all the bombing and drones and assassinations by the United States and Europe for the last 30, 40 years. They finally got mad. And so we saw these uprisings, these outbreaks in about 20 countries. We saw the French and the Germans at least temporarily closing their embassies. The American embassy in Beirut is shredding its documents in fear that they also would fall in the hands of some of these Islamicists. So it looks like if this sort of thing continues and it gets worse, the West simply will be ejected from the Middle East. They won't be able to maintain a presence there. Without embassies, they can't purchase the governments and make the payments to the governments. And so the kind of hegemony that the neoconservatives expected to establish over the Middle East would be lost. In the meantime, the United States continues to try to bottle up China with naval, air, and troop bases, even while the defense chief tells the Chinese that, oh, these bases aren't directed at you. Just like they tell the Russians that, oh, these missile bases aren't directed at you. You see, the United States government is so used to lying to the American people and being believed, they think the Russians and the Chinese will believe them too.
Amazing. Let me digress for a moment here, because we know the West and NATO used al-Qaeda to take over Libya. They're using them to blow up bases and attack Syria. That's on record. They're forcing people to be suicide bombers. or they kill their families. Our media puts this out like it's a beautiful, wonderful thing. We're seeing a schizophrenic policy where there is no morals in the elite but power, and they're totally opportunistic, but now it's like a snake eating its own tail. Their own precious Al-Qaeda is now striking back against them, and they're telling us, give our rights up because Al-Qaeda is going to attack you. I mean, the whole narrative it just makes no sense unless you're completely brain dead. So maybe some Americans, heavily fluoridated, still buy it, but nobody overseas, nobody that's got 2 brain cells rubbed together or who can tie their shoelaces or wipe their nose buys any of this. I mean, this does look like collective insanity.
Yes, you see, and what Washington has done by destroying the secular governments that sat on these Islamist forces, by destroying Saddam Hussein, by practically destroying Assad, by destroying Gaddafi, they've unleashed all of these very virulent and extremist Islamist forces that are determined to throw off all forms of Western influence, you know. And so how can they control it now? They can't. The way it was controlled was by the people we've overthrown. So we've produced the snake pit for ourselves. And, of course, the people in Washington, no one will want to admit that somehow their policy was wrong or is backfired. And so they will stick with the same stupid policy just so they don't have to admit they were wrong until it destroys them. And I think that's what basically they face. So what do you do? We have the fiscal cliff. It will be evaded, just like Congress evades the debt limit, the budget resolution. They evade everything that's a real problem. And they continue all of this pretense. So in the end, there's nothing but pretense. And so I think this is really what brings down the empire and saves us from the police state.
So it's an empire of delusion.
It's a culture and an empire of delusion. In fact, my next article is called The Culture of Delusion. And I think that there's so many different agendas wrapped up in this, and they're all deluded. You know, look, Alex, what public policy debate consists of anything but lies and propaganda? What political decision is ever made that's not a lie? Oh,
it's amazing. I've studied our policies. Our country's never been perfect, but 50 years ago, the State Department really did try to build up countries and industrialize them. Now it tries to destroy them. I mean, it really is a degeneration. Not that the ruling class was ever good guys, because power tends to corrupt, as you know, as a historian, not just an economist. But now they're smoking their own dope in the establishment, and they're destroying their own checks and balances that have protected them. They're building a wood chipper that they want to feed us into, but they're the ones that are going to end up going into it.
That's right. I think that's a good way to put it. And so the basis for hope is that there are so many agendas based on total lies that has produced so many miscalculations that it'll all come back on their heads. Now, the real question is, when they see that happening, will they push the button?
Yeah.
And who knows? But I think the best position that any American can take is to never believe one word from the government, not one word. It will never tell them the truth about anything, and there's no prospect of them being able to tell the truth because their agendas are wrapped up in mendacity and the worst kinds of crimes and ambitions, and so are the hopes. So
are they desperate, or are they megalomaniacs? I know it's a mix of the both, but I mean, certainly they're all in. They're committed to this, and so that makes them a dangerous foe.
Well, that makes them dangerous to the world and to the American people. You see, they've taken away our civil liberties. They've built these internment camps. They've broken the posse comitatus law, so they're prepared to use the same force and violence against American citizens that they use against the Iraqis, the Afghans, the Pakistanis, the Yemenis, the Libyans. So what's happened is persuasion and argument, convincing people. This is no longer their policy. It's violence, force and violence.
Sure, look at the Chinese. We're going to break. We're going to have until 40 after, and we've got our next guest on with breaking news. But you're absolutely right. The Chinese have got 98%, according to the Wall Street Journal, of rare earth minerals by soft power, by building people up. And meanwhile, our government uses force to take everything. And they are madmen.
Everything we said came true. Everything we've done has been right.
And there's just thousands of declassifications, radiating little kids, you name it. I mean, this has been going on a while when they brought in the paperclip scientists, the eugenics arm, but that's how they've grown their cult of ruthless people, and now they've taken over. Dr. Roberts, look, when you read what some of the top globalists are saying, they talk about a post-industrial world, a collapsing society, this fake green society. They've kind of created a cosmology, and you see the big banks, Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, funding it. Funding these different movements, telling us it's good to be austere. They've somehow convinced the public that most of these new taxes Europe's having to pay go to pay off their debts, but really most of it is the derivatives. How do they get away with this? Is it the total financial ignorance of the public that they're able to sign us on to their debts, and then the bankers get appointed as the prime ministers and presidents, and then they lecture us about how we shouldn't be able to take a hot shower while they have giant palaces and yachts? I mean, do they just think the police state's going to protect them? I mean, why do they think they're God? I mean, where do you see this going?
Well, they get away with it, Alex, because the print and TV media are their servants. Salenti calls it the prostitute media, and that's what it is. They get away with it because of propaganda. And now, to learn different, you have to watch Alex Jones or read certain parts of the internet. And for people who don't know how to judge and who traditionally relied on TV and the newspapers, this is a long time process of unlearning that these are not reliable sources, that you want to know what's happening, you've got to find information somewhere else. And it's a difficult challenge for most people. They don't have the time or the inclination or the know-how. They don't know who to trust. They just feel adrift. There was this article just out from a former New York Times foreign correspondent who quit. He said the New York Times is nothing but a propaganda machine for the United States government, for the military security complex, that I was being forced to write false reports to support the propaganda lines. Well, as more of that comes out, people might eventually catch on and learn where they can get good information. But that is a huge problem for people. The lack of information.
Well, let's get back to the economy briefly here. You're absolutely right. There's a new study out today showing a record number, depending on the 65 to over 70%, depending on which political group, don't trust the mainstream media. But like you said, they don't even know what's real then. But let me ask you this real quick. What does QE Unlimited mean? You called it a wealth transfer to the elite again earlier, basically. What does that mean? And I understand they're hyping collapse now to get more bailouts, but where are we going in this post-industrial world?
Well, first of all, post-industrial world is just a term they use for their agenda. There's no such thing.
Sure.
Now, but you ask about QE3, unlimited. What it means is the Federal Reserve is going to continue to purchase bonds. That means they're going to monetize the debt continuously, because by purchasing these bonds, they prevent interest rates from rising on the bonds. In fact, they've been successful in lowering interest rates so that the interest rate on a United States Treasury bond is negative because it's lower than the rate of inflation. Now, when they make the interest rates drop, they make the book value of the debt instruments on the bank's balance sheets rise. So it creates more appearances of solvency. So this whole thing is directed at keeping the banks solvent or making them more solvent by driving interest rates even more negative. Now, what are the consequences? The consequences are at some time, the rest of the world will finally realize that the unlimited expansion of U.S. debt and its monetization means they don't want to be in dollars. Now, if foreigners like China dump the bonds, the Federal Reserve can print the money to buy them and keep the bond prices high. But when the foreigners, say the Chinese, get the dollars for the bonds and then they dump the dollars, the Federal Reserve can't print foreign currencies to buy up the dollar. So I think the QE unlimited, what it means is the abandonment of the dollar. It will simply be seen as a monopoly play money that's been created in such profusion that nobody wants to hold assets denominated in dollars.
All right, hold it right there. That is so bombshell with Dr. Roberts. Alex Jones here with a message that could revolutionize health in this country. Going back about a year and a half ago, I began to learn about the incredible health effects of Youngevity products. Aaron Dykes lost 92 pounds. We're going to show you some before and afters. Aaron, break down what happened, your story.
I've worked really hard with diet and exercise to try to lose weight, but I just didn't get the results. It just didn't happen. Then I saw what you were doing with InfoWarsTeam.com. I wasn't even trying to lose weight, but I got it because I wanted to feel better energy. I wanted that nutrition. Didn't even understand how that could kickstart my own weight loss goals, but the products did that for me. I found myself suddenly losing weight, more energetic, wanting to exercise, wanting to eat the right foods.
And they don't even advertise it as weight loss. I want to challenge our radio listeners to go to InfoWarsTeam.com, sign up as a distributor, and get wholesale pricing discounts at InfoWarsTeam.com. There's a Paul Joseph Watson article I haven't even gotten to yet. That's how much incredible news there is. We're on C-SPAN. They talk about a false flag to be blamed on Iran. I mean, that's how dumb the ruling class thinks you are. They had Gary Hart 5 years ago write a letter to Ahmadinejad of Iran, and he said, hey, our government stages stuff, Gulf of Tonkin, Lusitania, the Maine, other events, you better do what you're told. And some said it was a warning. We actually interviewed Gary Hart. It's in the film Truth Rising. Luke Radowski did in We Are Change. And he admitted to it. I mean, he put it on the Huffington Post. It's not like it's a secret. But this new video, I saw it this morning, and Richard Reeves is like, why aren't you covering this during the break? And I went, oh, I meant to. I mean, people are always like, why did you cover this? I got like 100 articles in here. And it's insane the amount of craziness that's going on. And the fact that the rulers that run everything, I want to get Dr. Roberts' take on this and then get back into what QE3 or unlimited or in QE infinity symbolizes, the end of the dollar of the world reserve currency. I mean, that's the end of the empire unless they start World War III. And you notice that's all lined up right now. The ships off the coast of China, getting the conflict between Japan and China going. This looks like what we saw before World War I, World War II. And I'm not just saying that. A lot of top analysts are saying that. And then I'm reminded of this video that's up at Infowars.com, which I just reprinted, guys. You run that into me right now. I know it printed because I just printed it like 4 minutes ago. It's just mind-blowing. But Dr. Roberts, before we get into that briefly, get back into what QE3 actually means and what that symbolizes.
Well, it's the way the Federal Reserve finances the deficit. I think I saw recently that 3/4 of the federal deficit is financed by the Fed buying the bonds. This is the behavior of a banana republic. Now, the reason we haven't had exploding inflation is that the money is locked up in the banks because the consumers are too broke to borrow and the banks are too afraid to lend, and they need the cash in case the derivative thing comes unglued and they have to start settling their debts to one another. So all of the money that the Fed has created hasn't really had the inflationary impact because it's locked up in bank reserves. They're sitting on it. Now, the whole part about QE, there are two aspects of that. The Fed can forever create the money to support bond prices and thus keep low interest rates. But if people dump the dollar itself, the Fed is helpless because it cannot print foreign currencies to buy up the dollars. And so as the dollar loses its value, what happens is people abandon the stock market, the real estate market, the bond market, the currency itself, and all of a sudden the dollar is no longer the reserve currency, and all of a sudden the United States can no longer pay for its imports by printing money. So it ends the power. The empire crumbles overnight. The wars stop because there's no means of financing them. Most likely suburbia dies because there's no gasoline. Everything that we are now dependent on because the economy was offshored will simply be deprived of because the dollar won't be worth anything. So that is the downside, the potential downside of the Fed creating money to buy the bonds. Now, how long can this be kept going? Well, as long as people don't see an alternative, or as long as the United States can create, say, a crisis for the euro. You know, we've had the euro in crisis now all these years. This serves the Fed in Washington in keeping the dollar afloat, because you can't run to the euro. You can't run to the Swiss franc because the Swiss government said, when you come here, we're going to print the francs to give you for your dollars. So you can't make any more money speculating on our currency. The Chinese have not opened their currency up. And the Japanese don't want the roll. So it's sort of Washington thinks it can forever keep the dollar there, despite the fact that it's debasing it. Now, sooner or later, something is going to break. Somebody is going to say, we don't want these dollars. This is not worth it. Let us out. And then that's when it all comes unglued.
Now, obviously, they've got the police state, the camps ready, the military. They think they're just going to have a big war with everybody, and that's going to keep the bankers out of trouble, and they can use the crisis to get even more power. They're getting their Agenda 21 federal takeover of every town ready. They've got their federalization cards handed out to all their minions. They've got their spy networks, InfoGuards set up. I got to tell you, Doc, it looks like they've got this all planned out. I've got an article here that's up at Infowars.com in the featured news area. I'm going to make it the top story. I'm going to call Watson and have him move it to the top story. Lobbyist launch stage provocation to start war with Iran. And I saw this morning and have just gotten so conditioned to know they're staging all this that I didn't even cover it in the first hour and a half. We are in the game of using covert means against the Iranians. A member of the influential pro-Israeli Washington Institute for Near East Policy, WINEP, think tank has brazenly suggested on C-SPAN that the United States should launch a false flag provocation in order to start our war with Iran. Speaking on C-SPAN for the Washington Institute for Near East Policy from a luncheon on how to build a U.S.-Israel coalition on preventing Iran from nuclear breakout, WINEP Director of Research Patrick Clausen listed a raft of historical examples of where governments have either staged or exploited attacks in order to become embroiled in war. And he lists everything. Just, I mean, this is amazing.
That's right, Alex, that's right. But that's for Israel. That's not for the bankers.
No, I understand. Well, I mean, Israel, the mega
security complex. That's for Israel and the profits of the military security complex, and it could happen. But the downside of that could be overwhelming. Look, they couldn't occupy Baghdad. After 11 years, they can't defeat a few thousand Taliban. So what chance are they going to have with Iran or Russia or China? And you have to keep in mind, even though they've got these internment camps here and spying on everybody, it's a big country to occupy. And for a military that couldn't occupy Baghdad, it may not be able to occupy the United States. Now, of course, at least people in Iraq, some of the opponents that we face were organized. And, of course, the American people aren't. And if you try to organize militias, the FBI infiltrates you and arrests you. But under extreme duress, even Americans might get organized.
Yeah, no matter how much Florida. But let me just add to here, I was reading from Watson's article. I see Israel, NATO, the United States, Europe, all as one big interest. Clausen is also a former senior economist with the IMF and World Bank, and the point is that's who was at the meeting. So my point is the banksters, the military-industrial complex, all these systems are all like Russian dolls nesting within each other. So I see it as one block. My point is, no matter how big the crisis, even if they publicly create it, they use the ignorance of the public as a way to just get away with it. My point is they'll start World War III and tell us we should thank them for it. But my question to you is, and we have the clip here, why do you think they're so arrogant that they would go on C-SPAN and talk about false flag staging events?
Well, they got away with 9/11, so they can get away with it. They got away with murdering Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King. They've gotten away with so much, they just don't expect to be held accountable. In fact, now you can't hold them accountable because at war, the executive branch is above the law, above the Constitution. The Bush people established all that. So I don't think they think they can be held accountable. I would just say that not everybody is part of this. For example, our European puppets are puppets. They're bought and paid for governments, but their interests diverge from ours. They certainly don't want to be at war with Russia.
No, that would be glow-in-the-dark time. Let's play this short clip and get your take on it and let you go, Doctor, and we appreciate all your time. Here's that clip. This is up at Infowars.com. I'm moving it to the top story. This is lobbyists launch stage provocation to start war with Iran. Here is the clip of them openly talking about it. Here it is. And then we'll get Dr. Roberts' take on all of this.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall we had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. One can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? We can do a variety of things if we wish to increase the pressure. I'm not advocating that, but I'm just suggesting that this is not a either-or proposition. It's just sanctions has to succeed or other things. We are in the game of using covert means against the Iranians. We could get nastier at that.
Okay, let's stop right there. I don't want to insult women and call this guy effeminate, but I noticed in history, it's always these guys that have never probably been in a fist fight, never been in the military, never seen people die. They're always super wimpy people, where even crooks in the past in history would do this in a secret room. These guys are so arrogant, they're waving it around in front of everybody. Just like I saw Chris Matthews talk about staging 9/11 a month and a half before 9/11. He said big buildings are coming down. He had the heads of the Hart-Rubin Commission from the CFR on there. They were bragging about how America's about to change and laughing and celebrating it. You just saw Patrick Clausen do that. And Dr. Roberts, I mean, what do you make of this Byzantine, effeminate character up there showing off in all the tough guys, giggling and laughing about starting a war whose other people's sons are going to die in?
Well, he's an Israeli operative. who wants to get rid of the support that Hezbollah has so that Israel can occupy southern Lebanon and get the water resources. And he's up against the American military, which understands that attacking Iran is not a 3-day war or 6-week war, but a really serious thing. And the whole lid in the whole area could blow off. And once Iran is attacked, then we are in direct confrontation with Russia and China. And so the U.S. military or the majority of the top people have made it clear they're not interested.
The U.S. military is already fighting Russia in the proxy war in Syria.
But they don't want to be.
No, I agree with you. I agree that they know. That's why Dempsey came out a month ago and said, don't blame us if Israel attacks.
So if they don't want to be at war, and of course Obama has not been too happy with Netanyahu forcing him into a position against Iran. So I think that there's still some intelligence there that realizes this is not a good move. And so this guy is trying to create a situation around that. And of course, there is, as you have emphasized all your career, a secret government, something that's down below the surface. And they can conduct these types of operations regardless of the president or the Joint Chiefs or even the CIA. And this sort of dark government, or whatever you want to call it, is there. And so this guy's talking to them. He says, go on and start it. We don't care what the president thinks or the Joint Chiefs. We've got to serve Israel. We've got to get rid of Hezbollah's supplier so that Israel can get the water resources of Lebanon. And that's what he's doing. He's talking to the dark government, the people that can pull off things like 9/11, for example.
Yeah, that's what Steve Pachenik says. He says that it will destroy Israel, and he's Jewish, if they launch this. I just don't want World War III. And
nobody does. Nobody does. And the people who are willing to take the risk for their own personal agendas are the ones that will give it to us.
Sure, we'll take Richard Pearl. It was in the New York Times that he walked up to a group of reporters, good-looking reporter women, and thought you pick up women when you weigh 400 pounds and have giant black circles around your eyes. He thought you picked up women saying, I launch attacks, I kill people. And they were all creeped out and walked away, and that was in the news. But, I mean, it's a bunch of creepy, wimpy weirdos, academics, who think it's real manly to sit there.
He's not an academic. He's an Israeli agent.
No, I understand that. But what I'm saying is, well, still, they're a bunch of effeminate academics. And I think they're crazy.
I think they're very dangerous people because the only concern is them. No other concern. So,
really, how does Israel think they're going to get out of a war with Russia? That's Armageddon.
Well, you know, it's not Israel. It's the prime minister. You know, he's got a lot of opposition from his own military, his own intelligence service, from the opposition party, from Haaretz, the newspaper. The question is, how does somebody so out of tune with the intelligent part of the population get in office?
And why is Ahmadinejad making statements like, you know, the state of Israel is going to be wiped off? Why is he jumping up and down, adding to this rhetoric?
I think just because people are competitive and he gets tired of being having Iran unjustly accused and threatened and accused and threatened and accused and threatened. And so I think he's...
No, that's it. The Iranians are just ready for a fight. They don't usually start fights, but they will. Look at 1 million of them fought the U.S. proxy Iraq to a standstill. They got a lot more high-tech weapons now. They're gonna start a war with Iran. They're going to blow stuff up and blame it on Iran. And they're going to try to come arrest all of us. And this is the takeover, Doc.
Well... I think in many ways it'll backfire on them, and when they start the war with Iran, they'll really have their hands full. I don't think they'll get around to us.
No, I agree with you. I know this is hubris. This is 10 times Hitler going into Russia.
Right, you got it.
This is Barbarossa squared. Hey, great job, Dr. Roberts. Let's go ahead and give out your website. It's amazing, paulkirkroberts.org. Thank you for your tireless work and courage, sir. We salute you.
Salute you, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. What an amazing person. Visit Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. When you're on the site, you can also tune in 24 hours a day to my daily radio broadcast. There's also a free iPhone app to listen to the syndicated radio show when and where you want.